welcome everyone to another Tuesday here at LoFi History. Hello, Glen and Marie. How are y'all doing today?
We're doing good.
Yeah, I like your outfits today. I like them every week, but they're particularly interesting today. I see we've got two distinct themes going here. We've got clearly women's suffrage movement.
Votes for women!
I love it. I love it.
Suffrage succotash.
Suffrage succotash. It's pretty good.
To mishmash my metaphors from Bugs Bunny.
And Glenn, you are something Civil War-like.
I sure am.
Are you Union or Confederate?
I'm a
today?
Union soldier.
Okay, you're a Union soldier.
In his deliciously warm overcoat.
That's what I was going to say.
I
It
also
seems a
was
little
wearing
fancy.
it
Yes,
It's
we
cold
are
today.
all appropriately dressed for the weather. Well, hello everyone. If this is your first time joining us for LoFi History, this is our fun, casual hangout with historians and listen to some cool electronic music. And you get to ask your questions for Glenn and Marie. Any history topic, just make sure that's family friendly because all ages are of course welcome to LoFi History. And if we have any students in the audience, we highly encourage you to ask questions of Glenn and Marie. But we always like to start out, of course, with what you are wearing. So let's go into a little more detail with that. We'll start with Marie. Marie, so tell us about your costume today, or your attire, I should say.
So I am dressed as an early 1900s, so an early Edwardian suffragette. Well, not really a suffragette. I'm wearing the American colors.
Yes.
So I am a suffragist, not a suffragette.
Now, quickly explain what's the difference between suffragette and suffragist?
So a suffragette is primarily used to talk about women and people who wanted, specifically women who wanted the right to vote in Britain, in Great Britain at the time. Because suffragette is really it was an insult used in the paper towards the suffragists. Kind of a mispronunciation, if you will. But then the suffragists, they adopted the term and gave it more of a harder G, so like a suffragette, like we're going to get the vote. So they kind of like took back that insult term and made it their own.
I love that.
While in America, it was still an insult. They still wanted to be called suffragists.
I see.
And I'm wearing the American colors. So the British colors are very similar. Basically, instead of yellow, they have green. But in America, for the National Women's Party, I do believe there's a lot of different parties and organizations that are formed for the right to vote for women in America. Some just use gold, some use purple, white, and gold, some just use gold and white. So this is one specific organization. I believe it is the National Women's Party. And on it, I have my sash, which sometimes they would wear during parades or at rallies or when protesting. And then, of course, I have embroidered on it "Votes for Women," which is one of the popular slogans that they would use, which is pretty to the point.
Speaking of this beautiful, handcrafted, sewn by Marie herself sash, there is still one day to enter our suffrage sash raffle that we started for our Voices for the Vote Family Day this past Sunday. I'm going to put a link in all of the chats just in case you want to enter our raffle. The tickets are $5 each. You can enter as many times as you like, and you will have a chance to win this suffrage sash, and that's going to be announced tomorrow after our Wednesday live stream. So,
and let me tell you, dudes, don't be afraid to get into the raffle, because I can't think of a woman who would not dearly love this as a present.
Or you can wear it yourself and support
right.
women's suffrage.
There you go.
Well, you can, but we want to help women.
It'd be a great gift for a lady.
It would.
It would be a great gift for someone who's just interested in history and the movement.
Who wants women to vote.
That's right. So you can have your chance to do that. I put a link in all of the chats so far, and we're going to announce the winner tomorrow. Also, just a great way to help support the History Center. Another great way, of course, is to also donate toward our monthly donation goal. Yes, right over there. Yes. So we're at 115 out of 200. It's only February 16th. We've still got some time to go, but if you would like to show your support, we would greatly appreciate it. You can go to bit.ly/febgoal21 for that. So I will also put that in the chat. But enough of our yapping. Let's hear what Glen's wearing. So, Glen, you are a Civil War soldier in quite a warm piece of clothing here. You look kind of like it's a bit fancier than I would expect.
Well, it's actually, you have to remember what the fashions were at the time, right? So this is actually just an enlisted man's coat. It does come with a cape, though. I think the cape is what makes it so nice because it adds not only an extra layer of warmth, but theoretically, when it begins to rain or even snow, the idea is that it will help shed some of that moisture away from the body. So it's just the regular coat with this cape over it. The cape makes it look very fancy. The tall collar, of course, looks fancy and harkens back to a somewhat earlier period, but it also keeps your neck warm, right? And so the Union Army, being the Union Army and having access to all of the industrial might of the North, was able to issue a greatcoat to each and every soldier for the winter months. This isn't something that obviously would carry with them in the summer months. They would go back into regimental, usually regimental level storage, and they would just get brought out when cold weather approached. Now, the Confederate Army did not have that kind of industrial capacity. They did not have the capability to issue every soldier an overcoat, so very often captured Union overcoats were very popular. Coats from home were popular, or the old classic of just wrapping a blanket around yourself and pinning it to your shoulders was also an expedient. But yes, the Union has this comfy coat, so I decided to wear this dashing forage cap at a rakish angle with a very warm greatcoat, and I'm just as happy as I can be.
I like it. It looks super comfy. It looks very warm. I'm also interested in the hat that you're wearing. Is that sort of the standard that both sides would wear, or just the Union?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different hat styles from the Civil War that you think of with the Civil War. There's this which has a bill to it and a raked back, sort of a curved back. There's a kepi, which is from generally the French Army, was a stylistic small hat that was adopted to a certain extent from North African culture and was brought to the French. And then the United States Army copied a lot of things from the French Army for a long time. This, however, is a forage cap. It's a little bulkier in the top. The idea being that you could turn it inside out. You see how it kind of goes long, and you could put things in it, right? You're for foraging. If you come upon a couple of eggs or a bag of flour or something like that, you can help carry things in your forage cap.
Oh, wow.
But then you got to kind of mash it back down to give it the quasi-soldierly look.
That's pretty cool.
When you get to it. But these were popular for looks. They're very, very comfortable until it starts to rain or until the sun starts to shine a lot.
Yeah.
Then it's not very good at keeping the rain off. It is terrible at keeping the sun off, especially your back. So a lot of soldiers in the field would have wider brimmed hats. Armies in wartime are not very spit and polish, and they don't usually go by uniform regulations. So soldiers, as long as they can fight, and as long as they somewhat look the same, there's a lot more leeway as to what kind of headgear they're going to wear, what kind of boots and shoes and things like that they're going to have available to them, especially in the American Civil War.
Nice. Well, it looks like we have our first question from one of our favorite viewers, Olivia. Hey, Olivia. So Olivia asks, so whenever I say to anyone that the modern postal system is slow, everyone says that the Pony Express was slower. Is this true? That's a great question. I would love to learn more about the short-lived but still very impactful Pony Express.
Yes. It's faster now, but only because we have planes and trains and automobiles to haul stuff. It will take just a letter. If I write a letter to someone, say in California, and send it first class mail, all things being equal, it will probably get there within 3 to 4 days. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a miracle considering how many parcels and packages and letters the U.S. Postal Service has to handle each day. Now, the Pony Express was much faster than before, and what you have to think about is how fast things move according to the technology of the time. Before the invention and widespread use of steam engines, locomotives, the fastest way to send mail was via ship, because ships can travel faster than a person can walk faster than a horse can consistently travel. Remember, a horse can only run so far before it has to stop. A ship can move as fast as the wind continues to push it. So sometimes, like back in the day, when you're thinking of a letter could get to California, say from Georgia, faster. Well, actually, that's not true because they have to go around the Cape. Never mind. It's still ponies are still slower than what we have today, but the Pony Express did speed things up considerably for the time that they were around.
Now, for those who aren't familiar, can you give us a brief, in a nutshell, history of what was the Pony Express? When did it happen? Why did it happen?
So the Pony Express was a way to get letters rapidly, and what they would do is, the words post office, right, actually come from a post, a place that there would be, and the mail would travel via riders. And what would happen is a rider would come to the post office and they would stop, they would get off their horse. If they had been moving fast, they could change horses at this point. Now, up until Pony Express times, they would change horses, but they're not necessarily going at a dead run the entire time. What the Pony Express did is it placed these posts a little closer so that the horse could travel faster, right, at a less distance, but then the guy could literally take his saddlebags off, throw it under the horse, and be ready to go.
Right.
So the transition time was much, much less, and you could run the horses or trot the horses faster consistently because the posts were closer together and the horses could get rest going back and forth that way.
And about what era was this? The late 1800s?
Yeah, late 1800s.
Okay.
Late
and
1800s.
So I would imagine this sort of came about as more people were settling out west? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly. Because, the railroad gets to a certain point to the major towns and the stops, but you still have to get mail out from there, right? So that's really what the Pony Express was good at.
Now, speaking of mail, I mean, when I'm thinking of homesteaders out in the middle of nowhere where there's not a lot of roads, and perhaps there's just trails, I mean, are they still able to receive packages, mail? I mean...
Well, define receive. They don't come to their front door.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm thinking of course, our dear friend Laura Ingalls.
Yeah.
And when folks, when they left, they knew that they were going somewhere out west. So they told their family in Wisconsin, we're going out west. And as soon as we settle, we'll find the nearest post office and write you a letter so that you'll know where to write the letters to and send the packages to.
Yeah.
So for the Little House on the actual book, Little House on the Prairie, the nearest post office was Independence, Kansas, Fort Independence, Kansas, which I think was 40 miles away from where their cabin was. So every time they went to the post office, it was a 40-mile one-way trip.
Wow.
So they didn't exactly go every day. They didn't exactly go every month.
Yeah.
So a trip to the post office, you might have a lot of letters or packages waiting there for you. And remember, this is in the days where it had just begun to transition to the sender paying the postage rather than the receiver paying the postage.
Okay, so you're saying this is when that kind of changed?
It was sort of that was sort of the transition point.
Yeah.
It's when they were swapping from the receiver paying to the sender paying.
Fascinating. Well, thank you for your question, Olivia,
Yes.
and I hope that at least puts things into perspective.
It may be faster now, but it's not nearly as romantic.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Olivia. We also have a question from May on YouTube asking, who was the first person to die in the Civil War? Do we know who the very first casualty was? Or maybe you can give us some information on the first casualties of the Civil War.
Traditionally, there's a guy named Ellsworth who was a pro-union fellow in I want to say it was in Maryland. Someone will correct me on that if I'm wrong. But Ellsworth, and this was not a military casualty. This is basically someone who was vehemently pro-union in a generally pro-secession area, and he raised up United States flag on his property after secession, and folks stormed in and killed him, right? And shot him dead. And the folks in the North who were very much, pro-union, they took the shirt off of his body, and when they would give speeches, they would wave the bloody shirt, which has come to be sort of a metaphor for a politician using something gruesome to encourage people to feel one way or vote one way. You're waving the bloody shirt. That's where this originally comes from, is from Ellsworth. And so this was obviously very early in 1860, before any of the actual battles took place. That's the traditional beginning, if I recall, of the first death from maybe not the Civil War proper, but from the acts of secession.
It looks like, from good old Wikipedia, that he was killed in Alexandria, Virginia.
Alexandria, Virginia, thank you.
Yes. So
which is close to Maryland.
Right. So if you want to know more, it's Elmer E. Ellsworth. And I can actually, if you're interested, I'll just go ahead and throw in the Wikipedia article.
Right.
Do always be careful with Wikipedia, though. So we can give you, the basics.
Check those footnotes.
Yeah.
Yes, check the footnotes. And May says thank you, so you're very welcome. We also have Robert here. Hello, Robert.
Hey, Robert.
One of our longtime viewers. And Robert asks, what battle before 1900 that was outside of the U.S. affected the U.S. the most? That's a great question. So what battle before 1900 outside the U.S. had the greatest impact or affected the United States the most? And maybe as you're brainstorming, you can tell us, what events do come to mind, and we'll hash out what was the most impactful before 1900.
See, this is what happens when you ask someone like me this question. I begin to overthink
Yeah,
it.
right. That's what I was like. You can just say what you're thinking.
So here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
The Battle of Quiberon Bay.
All right.
Next question.
No.
So,
Quiberon.
Quiberon Bay, which is actually in France. So, this is during the French and Indian War, when the French and the British are struggling for control of the North American continent. They had fought several wars in the 1700s to try to assume dominance, to assert dominance over the area, one to the other, as the Spanish and the French and the British and the Native American different tribes played each other off. It had gotten to the point, the French and Indian War, it looked like it was down to just two, the British and the French. And there had been a lot of battles here between the British and the French, but the battle that took place in Quiberon Bay in France actually had a huge impact on the outcome of the French and Indian War. Why, I'm sure you're going to ask, is because it was a French fleet full of money and full of supplies and full of reinforcements for the French forces in America that was defeated at Quiberon Bay by a British naval force. And therefore, those reinforcements and the money and the supplies did not come to New France. And as a result, New France, as a direct result of that, New France, long story short, loses the war and has to surrender to the British forces in North America, making British North America 100% British North America, from Florida all the way up into Canada along the East Coast, which of course sets the path for what the dominant political, social, and economic culture will be in North America, which leads directly to the American Revolution, which of course leads to our independence.
Wow.
I'm sure there are other people that other battles will spring to their head, but
I was thinking
that's what I've got.
General Garibaldi and the Italian.
The Italians?
Oh, talk to us about that.
Because, well, not only did he influence fashion with his red Garibaldi shirt, he also helped inspire the Confederates to lead their own independence movement.
Well, that's true.
Start the Civil War.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Didn't your friend wrote a book about
Yes, Dr. Ann Tucker wrote a book. Who we had a live book, not unleashing. That's not the right word.
Launch.
Unveiling?
Launch, yes. Unleashing. A book unleashing. A book launch here, a virtual book launch for Dr. Tucker. She's on our board. And she wrote a book basically that you're right, ties very, very closely to the Italian independence, not the Italian unification movement, I guess you could call it, with the Confederate independence movement.
Yeah.
Firstborn of nations. Is that
Yes.
Yes, Firstborn of Nations.
Yeah. I think it was
Dr. Tucker's book is what
newest of newborn nations. Let me see. Newest of newborn nations and Tucker.
Yeah.
It looked fascinating. Newest born of nations.
Newest born of nations. Thank you.
Yeah, and we highly recommend that. I'm also going to put that link in the chat for anyone who is interested. And we got some more questions.
Who was it?
For
Was
us.
it Mary who asked that question?
Let's see. The question was from Robert.
Robert, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Did you have one in mind, Robert? I wonder.
Let us know.
If you were just pulling that one out of the air because you were curious, or if you were looking for something.
Yeah. Do let us know. So we have Susan asks, I watched the Austin Dabney live stream. Did his friend Giles Harris ever own slaves prior to meeting Dabney? That's a great question. And just if you're not familiar, we did have a live stream about Austin Dabney, who was a patriot, formerly enslaved man, who then gained his freedom by fighting in the American Revolution. He was awarded his freedom by the Georgia legislature. I think he may have been the only African American to be awarded that
in the state of Georgia.
In the state of Georgia, yes, in the state of Georgia. And then he is saved from the battlefield by a fellow white soldier named Giles Harris, and they end up becoming basically like a family. They are lifelong friends, and Dabney ends up actually living with Harris and his wife and his family, and working for them.
Harris names his first or second born son after Austin.
Yes, so clearly like such a fascinating relationship for the time. But I try, we've done a fair amount of research on Austin Dabney. There's a fair amount of information we can pull from him, but for Giles Harris himself, I have not personally in my research come across any indication that he owned slaves. I wonder if he would have even been of that social stat or economic status to have the money to own slaves.
Right, and there is no hard evidence saying that he did or did not. But Libba, I think you're right. Given what we know of his economic status, given his attitudes and relationship with Dabney post-war, I think it's safe to go out on a limb and say he did not.
Yeah, that would be quite a change in perspective.
Yes.
But if you want to go back and watch that live stream, it is on our YouTube channel. And if you are a teacher, you can also schedule a webcast where students can meet Austin Dabney, ask him questions, and Giles Harris. So it's a really fun webcast where you get to see these historic characters interact. But thank you for that question. Thank you for watching the live stream.
Yeah.
Let's see, our next question is from Olivia. And Olivia asks, oh, interesting. Marie, is it true that women would ingest tapeworms to achieve the ideal body shape of the time?
I've never even heard that.
Don't encourage her.
Yeah, right. Now, Marie, maybe you can talk to us about some of the ways, because in your fashion live streams, a lot of it is about the shape or the silhouette. Can you talk about sort of how the silhouette has changed over time?
Yes, I think, and I'm going to destroy modern culture for a moment. Historically, women have not had to change their bodies themselves to achieve an ideal form. They use padding and they use corsetry. And most of the times corsetry, it moves your flesh around a bit, but it's not as repressive as movies like to make it look, or
yes, those classic moments of
every single historical movie they have a scene where they hold the corset in, and only would super upper class women do that for a dinner party.
Yeah.
And that if they were trying to land a husband, right?
Maybe.
Yeah,
or
maybe.
If they wanted to themselves, or they felt the social pressure to, it would only be for that one event for a few hours. Or if they just did it themselves because they wanted to. But that would be much more of a high society type of thing to do, because otherwise you're a working woman. You have things to do. You can't just suffocate yourself. And also, why would you suffocate yourself? Anyway, corsets are not strangle devices unless you make them. You can make any clothing. I can strangle myself with a sash if I try.
Yes, right.
Like
they were for support.
They were for support. They were structural garments. And yes, they did shape the body as well, but it was the corset that was shaping the body, not you having to shape the body yourself. Or you would have like a hoop skirt, or you would have a false rump, or a split rump, or a farthingale. So you would have things that would shape the body that you would put on the body, and that's how you shape the body. You don't have to, like, today we shape the body by doing different diets or different workouts or different things like that, where we actually are changing our physical body. Historically, women did not have to change their physical body, they changed what they put on their body.
That's a fascinating distinction. And Olivia says, they're trying to prove my science teacher wrong about corsets and body shape. Yeah, so you can let your science teacher know that.
Ask them what their facts are.
Yes, right.
What are their sources? And you cannot say costume dramas.
Yes, right. So thank you, Olivia, for that
Although
question.
tapeworms do get in people.
They do.
Oh,
I've never actually heard that was a widespread popular.
Right.
Not a thing to do on purpose.
I've never heard of that being like a large thing that people actually did.
Yeah. Whew. No thanks.
Ooh, no. That's like eating Tide Pods.
Oh, right.
A small segment of the population makes us all look bad.
Right.
Yeah, right. But just talking about all of the different shapes and the padding and stuff, we'll have to keep that in mind for a future live stream. That sounds fascinating.
We could do one where I just go through the under things.
Yes.
Instead of like the fashion.
Yes.
Like on top.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting.
Not the body shape, but the silhouette shaper.
Yeah.
Actually, they would be called foundational garments, because that's what you build the dress on. And even up until about the 1960s or 70s, I think JCPenney's called their underwear foundations.
Oh,
the foundations department.
Wow. So they kept it for quite some time?
Yes,
That's pretty
now
fun.
we call it underwear because we wear it under our things, our outer clothes. But for a very long time, they were called foundations because that's what you build the dress off of.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Oh, thank you for that question,
Yeah, that
Olivia.
was really interesting.
And our next question comes from Sienna. Hello,
Hi,
Sienna. Sienna is one of our awesome students in our homeschool connection class. And Sienna wants to know, did Robert E. Lee own slaves? Was Robert E. Lee himself a slave owner?
Yes, he was. He had married into a family that was descended from the Washington. He married a Custis, and Washington's wife Martha was a Custis. So he married into the elite Virginia society. You may not know this, Arlington National Cemetery, which is where many American soldiers are buried, was originally the Lee plantation. That home that's there was Lee's plantation home, and the grounds there were Lee's plantation. So yes, Lee did own slaves. It's interesting, it was not, according to what we know, it was not because of the issue of slavery that he decided to join the Confederacy. It was because his state of Virginia decided to go along with the Confederacy. Now, the state of Virginia went along with the Confederacy because people were worried about the right to own slaves, but it's not a direct thing. As a matter of fact, at the very beginning of the war, direct from the Commander-in-Chief, Winfield Scott, I think he was asked, who would you have lead the Union armies in this coming war? And Scott melodramatically says, I tell you and I say, with the last breath of my life, let it be Robert E. Lee.
Wow.
So they did offer to Lee command of the entire Union army.
Wow.
And he said, let me think about it. This is a big deal. He goes home, he walks around Arlington, and the next day he writes a letter to the Secretary of War resigning his commission in the U.S. Army, and then offers his services to the state of Virginia, where he is put in charge of Virginia's state militia. And he's not put in charge of the Confederate Army in the East until about a year later.
Wow.
But yes, he did own slaves.
Yeah. thank you for joining us today, Sienna, and thank you for your question. Susan also mentions there is a book called Consumptive Chick where women wanted the look of TB. Is Marie familiar with this book?
I'm not familiar with the book, but I am familiar with the concept.
Oh, so what is this concept?
There was, I'm going to, for lack of a better word, I'm going to call it a trend. That in the Victorian era, people kind of romanticized dying from tuberculosis. It was considered a romantic disease. We do it somewhat with diseases today. We romanticize people dying from this, thing that they can't help really, and they just end up dying. So what can you do? You can romanticize it and make it
seem like a good thing.
Like a good, like, oh, you tried really hard. I don't know.
Yeah.
People romanticize disease today. They've done it for a very long time. In the Victorian era, you had a large amount of people dying from tuberculosis. They didn't know how to treat it. They didn't exactly know what it was all the time. Sometimes they would just call it consumption. Consumption was kind of a catch-all term for they died of something we don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Something heart and lungy.
Yeah.
Yes. So sometimes tuberculosis and consumption are considered the same thing. Sometimes they are not. Retrospective diagnosis is something that should be done with extreme care. And that is when people from our time try to decide what people actually died from back in their time, using our modern lingo. So that's why I will just say, sometimes it's tuberculosis, sometimes consumption is not. So people were romanticizing this disease, so people kind of wanted to look like people who died from tuberculosis, which means that you are very pale.
Oh.
And sometimes people would,
That's fascinating.
And sometimes people even go to the lengths of painting veins on themselves.
Interesting.
So
I did not know that.
You were so pale, people would
yeah.
paint veins. It's not a widespread thing.
Yeah.
I don't think that it was a huge
but
fashion movement.
A little subset.
But there was definitely
Victorian Goths.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly what it is. Wow.
Yeah. There was a section of society who thought this was a great thing. I think sometimes like with the corsets or with height lacing or with the consumption things, we blow it out of proportion. We're everyone in Victorians did this. And no, there is a good section of society and a good portion of society that did, but it was not necessarily everyone.
It was not a universality.
Yes.
Wow. Well,
but there was definitely a thing.
I just found an article from Smithsonian Magazine, How Tuberculosis Shaped Victorian Fashion. So I'm going to throw that in the chat if y'all are interested in learning more.
Pale skin was a universal.
Yeah.
Victorian. I don't want to look like I work outside.
I see. Right.
Thing.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Susan. And that book, in case you wanted to check it out, was Consumptive Chic. That's a pretty good title.
Yes.
Karen wants to know, how comfortable was a bustle? And for any of our viewers that aren't familiar, what is a bustle?
So a bustle is something that you tie around your waist, and then it kind of gives you an extra booty. It makes your butt look bigger.
I'm gonna put a picture of one in the chat.
Yes, I'm I'm not sure how to explain it other than that.
Yeah, so there's actually a nice diagram of all sorts of different bustles.
Oh, there's lots of different bustles.
Yes. All right, so this is one that I found. So I'm gonna throw it in here. Oh, that's very large. Hold on.
That's the top of it.
There we go. So
there we are.
A bustle gives you that bump.
Yes.
Curvaceous backside.
Kind of like half of a hoop skirt, if you will.
Yeah.
So you just have, because this was really in fashion right after the big poofy skirt era, and the started in 1840s, goes to 1850s, 60s, and then starting in 1860s, it starts to move towards all the skirt fullness moves towards the back. Well, then you have to have something that supports it. So basically, you have half of a hoop skirt, which is your bustle, and then there's a bunch of different bustles. There's a lobster tail bustle, natural form bustle. Lots of different things. So basically, it's when you have a large amount of fabric on the back side of the dress and the front is pretty just straight.
Here's one example I've got for us.
Yeah.
There we go.
After the tragedy of the American Civil War, women decided they wanted to go through doors without any trouble.
but still have all of the fabric.
That's right.
So then you have like you can see in that picture, there's lots of like draping that goes on, so much trim that it's gorgeous. It's really pretty. More is more in the Victorian era, especially post 1860.
Now, as far as being comfortable, I mean, would a bustle be weighted in any? Would it be pretty lightweight?
When I've worn them, I've not had any problems.
Yeah,
because you have a corset. Like I said, we have these foundational garments. Yes. So you have a corset that's really, it's not like it's going to dig into you because you have a corset that's going to be that foundational garment. It's not pulling on it's not pulling on like your middle, it's pulling on the corset. The corset helps evenly distribute the weight across the entire corset, across your entire torso. So it's not going to be like pulling you back at the navel. It's going to be
things hang off of it.
Easily distributed. There's even girls to this day where they have these giant hoop skirts that with like weighted, like a very heavy fabric on it, and it digs into their sides where they feel like they have to put padding on the hoop skirt. But if they were actually wearing corsets, that protects you from getting dug into by the hoop skirt, because it evenly distributes the weight across your torso.
Wow.
And people back then were not dumb.
Well, and you know, and tell them when you say I don't want to correct you, but when you say corset, everyone thinks of the incredibly narrow, strict garment. Mm-hmm. Some of them are just, they have rigid components, and they, as you say, they shape and they base. They don't constrict. Remember that a corset is not just constricting.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hugging.
It's like a hug.
Yeah.
And you can make it hug as tight as you want or as loose as you want.
And it's funny because that's the exact same way that garments under armor work too. That people ask, well, you know, how can you wear all that armor? Because you have on a foundational garment that's made to fit you, and then you tie the armor to that up and down, and so the weight is distributed across your body. It can move. It's not all just dragging down on one spot.
Now, is it hard to sit in a bustle? If you are not experienced, yes. You have to like back up to a chair. You have to like know where the chair is. You have to kind of like feel the chair with the back of your legs, and then you sit. And also you kind of have to like get the bottom of the bustle up, like over the seat.
That's funny.
But once you do that, it collapses and it's fine.
You don't even see the chair.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, actually, there's a really fun thing. There was a thing in the 1870s, 1880s where they actually had like a chair up under the bustle, so you could just sit.
What?
Like you just had like your own little chair strapped to you.
That's amazing.
Clever.
It was very fun.
Wow.
I just watched. There was a historical costumer who just made one. It was really
that's so cool. Wow. And Sienna wants to know, did people faint from corsets? So Sienna, maybe you were just, I know you tuned in a little bit later. So Marie, just to sort of catch Sienna up on that, on that myth.
Yes. So some ladies did tight lace, and that's when you lace your corset really, really tight to get a really small waist, which is really only a Victorian thing, a late Victorian thing.
Thank you so much to make mistakes. Gonna make this a little smaller. There you go. Thank you, Make Mistakes, for the host. Appreciate it.
Yes.
On Twitch.
Because if you look at corsetry throughout time, sometimes the style of corset, it's not about having a tiny waist. But really when you get into the later Victorian era, into the Edwardian era, a smaller waist is more fashionable. So first we have to think, well, we're only talking about a certain time period where that would be fashionable. Because in the Regency, no one even cared about your waist. There was no waistline. It was empire waist, which means like right under, it's very much a column situation. So no one cares about you having a tiny waist, but you still are wearing a corset under the garment. It's usually, you could have long, actually they're actually called stays. So you could have long stays or short stays. Corsets don't actually come into until about the 1830s, 1840s. Okay. As when you have a corset opposed to stays. Yeah. But people, if it's a thing that goes under that laces up, everyone thinks it's a corset. Yeah. But that's not necessarily true. We'll have a whole lesson about that one day.
Will, yes. But it sounds like,
so we're only talking about, that one time period where some women did tight lace, but that's not necessarily everyone. Yeah. So women who tight lace are women who can, one, they have like someone to lace them up. Probably like a maid, so they're probably more wealthy. Otherwise, you might have to get your mom or your sister or, you know, someone else who just, you know, your husband or something to do it for you, because it is in the back. It's hard to do it. But also, you can lace yourself up. I've done it before.
Yeah.
When you're doing it normally,
Yeah, because you have a busk in the front, so it's really, you just kind of tighten. You don't have to lace the whole thing up every single time. You just loosen or tighten where needed. So we're only talking about a certain section of time, a certain population who does tight lace, who are usually more wealthy women. They usually only do it when they are going out into public for a fancy dinner party or a fancy evening, a ball or a dinner party, evening party, most likely. Perhaps a tea, but maybe not. So a certain portion of the population during a certain portion of history for certain events.
Yeah.
That gets blown way out of proportion. Yes, did it happen? Yes. Is it incredibly common where women fainting left and right throughout the entire Victorian era? No.
Yeah.
I mean, at least not from corsetry.
Right. Well, thank you, Sienna, for that question.
Yes.
And, Gavi wants to know about different types of hats throughout time. So,
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
That's
well, they do
excellent...
cover your head.
Yes.
Yes. People like to wear them because it protects you from sun. And sunscreen wasn't invented until the 1900s.
Yes, I think, you know, we could say that there are two reasons to wear a hat: to keep off the sun, the weather, or what have you, or to stay warm. Now, what?
Also, sometimes for modesty reasons.
Oh yeah.
Well, wait, no, I was getting there.
Oh,
I was getting there. So the two practical reasons are
Yeah.
to protect you from weather and to keep you warm. Taking those in hand, it becomes a matter of fashion based on the appearance of beauty in certain cultures, or based on the available materials, right?
Right.
Straw hats, cloth hats, leather hats,
Fur hats.
hats. And then as humans do, when you have a necessity for a piece of clothing, then you make the piece of clothing look cool. And then you do get to a point where it becomes a matter of social mores and modesty and what kind of hats are acceptable and not acceptable for men or for women. You know, we are in a phase of society right now where you can wear a hat or not.
Which is weird, honestly, because if you look back, up until like the 1950s, everyone always wore a hat.
Yeah, I mean,
they did.
This is one of the few times in history where we have more or less of a hatless society.
Oh wow. I mean, do you think that's just because we spend more time indoors? Yes, Glen.
I know. One explanation for it in the United States, anyway. We're very hatless in the United States nowadays. As you say, from the foundation of the country up until about the early '60s, men especially, wore hats. Then something crazy happened. That young generation that fought World War II started to set some new fashions. The post-war world started to change, and someone became president who was hip and young and happening. John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And John F. Kennedy decided he was not going to wear a hat anymore. And so it's interesting. Every president before that, you see him with hats. After Kennedy, he's outside, he's moving around, doesn't have a hat at all at any time. And the White House and especially the young, JFK and his wife, being the trendsetters for fashion, then no one else is going to wear a hat either. Look at us rebelling against the way things were. And that's really in the U.S. at least, when the hatless male appeared, and he hasn't gone away.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, Gabby, excellent question, and I also think an excellent topic for a longer live stream sometime. That would, because there's probably so much more to dive into.
Headgear is fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you, Gabby. Robert wants to know, how many presidential grave sites have you been to? Have either of you ever visited a presidential grave site before?
I know. Yes. I've been to... Now it's counting.
I mean, have only been to 2.
Which ones?
Now that I think about it. There's JFK's at Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah.
So I you got to walk. Oh, look, there's Eternal Flame. When you go to Arlington, you just have to walk by that.
Same.
So I've seen that one.
Yeah.
I've seen Andrew Jackson's gravesite at his
cool.
home site at the Hermitage near outside Nashville, Tennessee. That may be it.
Yeah.
I think that may be it.
Now,
No! I've seen Jefferson. Yes, of course, because Jefferson's buried at Monticello.
Oh wow.
So I have seen Jefferson's gravesite as well. So I guess that's 3.
Have you gone to Mount Vernon? Because that's for Washington.
No, I haven't been to Mount Vernon.
See, I also have sadly not been to Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
I haven't been to that
That'd be
one.
awesome though.
I have been in the Capitol where they wanted to bury Washington.
Ah.
There is an unused grave vault
Wow.
in the middle of the rotunda.
He said no thanks.
And Washington said, I don't want to do that.
I think that's probably. I mean, I can understand. You don't want to be walked on every day.
Well,
Yeah.
and this was part of the genius of Washington. He understood. He enjoyed being the man. I don't think there's any question about that. But he also realized that the beginning is a very delicate time, and he knew every single little thing he did was going to be looked at as a precedent for future presidents and future generations, which is why he did not seek a 3rd term. Remember, there's no limitation on how many terms a president can serve until FDR.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
And because it was tradition set by Washington. He did not want to be buried under the Capitol and the Rotunda because that could lead to a lot of other issues. How many crowned heads are buried in Westminster Abbey?
Yeah.
I don't want to say all of them, but a lot.
Yeah.
Not all of them.
A lot.
But
but
a lot
yes,
of them.
A lot of them.
Because some are buried at Windsor in the St. George's Chapel.
So I guess my answer's 3. I guess 3.
I think I've only done 1 then. I've only seen JFK and the Eternal Flame.
Wow. Still very cool though.
There's someone else buried at Arlington and I just can't remember.
Yeah.
I'm so mad. There's another
Well, if it
president
pops in
there.
your head, let us know.
Yeah.
But great question, Robert. Thank you for joining us again. And let's see. So we've also got a question about make mistakes made a really funny joke earlier saying that the tightening of the corsets was like special occasion Spanx. So that's basically
It is!
Oh my gosh, how funny would it be if Spanx came out with like their own tight corset? Don't do that, Spanx. That's
Interesting
unhealthy.
fact, the German High Command before and during World War II issued corsets to their general and field marshal level officers so that they would cut a trim figure at parades.
Ah, that's funny. Wow.
Didn't do Goering any good, but some of the other ones looked fine.
Wow.
There was, and I think it was whenever men had the really high-waisted in the 1820s, 1830s, when men had the very high-waisted pants.
Okay.
Men corsets came into fashion for like a little bit.
Yeah.
They weren't incredibly popular, but they were a thing.
Because those pants,
Were high and usually just
they show off your gut so bad.
yeah.
And your bottom.
Yeah.
They are not flattering to men if you are this much overweight.
Yeah.
Trust me.
So men's corsets became a thing for a hot minute because of
The shape,
pants
yeah.
and the pant shape, and that's also the same time period when women corsets went really small because they were just trying to do a column shape.
Yeah. Wow.
Squishing
Let's
them
see.
tummies.
Yeah. So let's see. On the same topic, and then we'll get to Susan's question. So would women have more than one corset or pair of stays, etc., like one for work and one for fancy occasions?
That completely depends upon the socio-economic status of the lady. If you are a working woman, you might just have a working corset, which is sometimes, we don't have a lot of those that survive, because really when we think about example garments that we have, usually those are only like extremely wealthy garments, or garments of very wealthy people who they might have just been worn like once or twice, versus the everyday workaday clothing. Well, you're gonna wear that until it's rags.
Yeah.
Because you can't afford to get a new one just at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
A hat there again.
Yeah.
So you wear the one that you have for a really long time until it's worn out, and then you're not going to keep it because like who wants a rag? Or you're going to cut it up and try to make something new out of it.
Yeah.
So a lot of the ones that we have are are the fancy corsets, are the very incredibly well-to-do corsets versus the garments that we have that everyone probably would have worn and would have looked like. We don't really have great examples of. We have some, but not a whole lot. But working corsets, they're structural garments. They are there to support you while you work, because while you want everything to stay in place while you work. So you have your working garments. They look sometimes, depending on what era we're in, they look a little bit different than the fancy corsets. Usually they're definitely made out of not as fancy material. They're more coarser or just plain material, versus when you get into like I'm thinking like Gilded Age, 1890s, like when millionaires in America are just having a field day. You find some beautiful like ribbons and lace and embroidery and all of this stuff on corsets, and they're gorgeous. Now those ladies, they might have one to go with each outfit. Who knows?
Yeah, right.
They want a different colored one for every day of the week. Yeah. If you can afford it, go for it. But a lot of ladies, they're going to probably have one that they wear for everything.
Good question, Olivia. Now we're going to go to Susan's question. Marie or Glen, do y'all know much about sumptuary laws throughout history?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with what that means.
That's who can wear what.
Oh, interesting.
There are laws in place governing what level of status you must be to wear certain things.
Wow.
Yes, and it was usually of birth or political status, not economic status.
Okay.
For example, in ancient Rome, the purple that the senatorial class was allowed to wear, only the senatorial class was allowed to wear, and it was from an incredibly rare mollusk shell somewhere, I can't remember exactly where in the Aegean, but it cost a fortune to get from the Aegean and process it and turn it into a dye. So that's why you see in the senatorial class, their robes are going to have that purple stripe, and eventually only the emperor could wear all purple.
Ooh.
Which is why purple has become the royal color, like with the kings and the queens
color.
And everything like that. Yeah. So
that's so cool.
So yeah, sumptuary laws go way back, and they're a way for the elites to enforce their standing in society, because it's all about ostentatious display.
Yeah, okay.
You've got to show that you're the elite. You can't just say it. And the best way to show you're the elite is to make sure no one else can can wear the things you're wearing.
Now we don't do it with laws, we just do it with money.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, how recent were sumptuary laws in place? Like, were they ever in the United States?
I don't know.
No, I don't think
so. It's kind of way back. Yeah.
The most recent that I know of were during the reign of like Elizabeth I and James I.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if they went past that.
Were they still
maybe
going?
They just weren't enforced.
Possibly.
Right.
I'm not. I know about them in general. I don't know exactly what.
Yeah.
There would be a lot of different time periods that we have to go back and look at
oh man.
Yeah, the last ones I know for a fact they existed were in England during James I's reign. There may be after that. I just don't know about them.
Which also shows how people who perhaps were not as affluent or perhaps did not have as much political say were still interested in fashion enough to where they had to tell them no.
Right.
Because there were a lot of common people who had gotten rich through business or through war or what have you, but they're not of the proper social class. And so that's another reason, even if you were the wealthiest person in ancient Rome, you could not wear the purple. Couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because you had the poorest senator could wear purple and you could not if you owned half the peninsula.
Wow. Now, Susan does make an interesting comment. Weren't sumptuary laws in the U.S. when women had to cover their legs and wear certain bathing suits that didn't show too much skin? Would that count as a sumptuary law?
Say no, because that's not saying. That's like more public decency, because we have public decency laws today. Like, you still can't go run around
Like-
naked.
Right.
No woman could show off her ankles, no matter how rich or poor she would be.
Right,
So
so
it's not
okay.
sumptuary.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's a fine point.
Right.
Yes.
To be sure.
So sumptuary is more talking about like I am wearing this because I am this social status and I have
Yeah.
earned it by birthright or whatever
So-
the custom is. Yeah.
Yeah. Sumptuary is predominantly about class,
Okay.
not
yeah.
necessarily morality or even gender, really. Or
A
anything
good
like
point
that.
though, Susan, because
Yeah.
that's a fascinating topic as well. Just I mean, that part of fashion we don't really consider, you know.
Did you know that even today, that if you wear a suit of armor into Parliament, you will be considered treasonous and sentenced immediately to death?
I love
Oh
laws
my
like
gosh.
that.
It's true.
Wow.
Fantastic.
So
We
no-
also have Joshua here today. Hello.
Hi,
Hi, Josh. Good to see you. Now we are at the end of our program, but we have if Josh, if you want to throw in a question, or if anyone else wants a last question, go ahead. I did want to give everyone a heads up of our live streams that are coming up. Now we have so many that I have to also remind myself what the next day is. Now I know that we have an exciting one. This is a character performance tomorrow about Beulah Rucker, and she was a fascinating woman, a local figure of history here in Gainesville, Georgia, who was an educator and activist. A fascinating story, as she was an African American woman who was getting her education at the turn of the century, a time when that opportunity was not widespread for many people. So we're going to have the wonderful Shiara Richardson portray Beulah Rucker, and then we'll have a discussion about the life and times of Beulah Rucker herself. So even if you're not a Gainesville native, still a fascinating piece of local history and a really wonderful story, quite an inspiration. And she's had a long legacy here in the school system in Gainesville. Anything to add to that, Glenn, that you wanted to add?
No, we'll be talking about that. And there's a local historic site and the Beulah Rucker Museum, and there's still an organization in town. They still do a lot of great things. We'll be talking about some of that too.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, we all had a sit down right before this, and we came up with 2 months worth of fantastic programs.
Based on your requests,
That's
by
right.
the way. Yes, so thank you to everyone.
So
who
if they're
did
no
that.
good, it's your
It's
fault.
your fault. And then, so please do join us for Beulah Rucker tomorrow. That's our Wednesdays at 2 p.m. live stream, completely free, open to everyone, great for all ages. And then this Friday, we have Marie is presenting on the history of engagements.
Yes.
So, Marie, give us a little teaser about that members live stream.
We are going all the way back to ancient Egypt
Oh, wow.
to talk about the history of engagements.
That's awesome.
Will you, Marie, tell us all about engagements?
I will!
Yay! I'm also so those are our digital member programs. So if you want to become a member, if you're not already, then do so at the link that I just put in the chat. And we have a last question from Josh, a very good question. Josh asks, why do y'all think Smith is a common last name? Does it come from the occupation of a smith? And
A smith. We tend to think of blacksmith
yeah.
today.
There's also goldsmith,
Silversmith,
silversmith.
tinsmith. By hand and hammer are arts maintained, as they said back in the day. So all those trades use some form of hammer or metallurgy or things like that. And so the smith craft involved in each one certainly, and that's how you identified, right? Yeah, I'm John Tinsmith, and you're, Bob Silversmith, and you married Jimmy John Goldsmith. So yes, that is one reason that the name Smith is so very, very common. They would just, shorten it up to Smith.
Are there other common last names that also come from like an occupation way back
All
when?
of them.
All of them, yeah.
A lot of them come from, even like Walker comes from an occupation,
yeah.
like they would walk on the wool, or Fuller.
Right.
Which came
Yeah,
from
Fuller.
Walker.
What does Fuller mean?
So, Fuller, like in the old English, where you make like it's an interesting occupation where you like basically walk on the wool to like make it. It's like processing the wool.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yes.
Oh, Susan also mentions weaver.
Yeah,
Yes,
weaver.
Weaver's favorite
So lots of
field.
textiles.
Glover.
Yeah. Glover. That's so fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other ones.
Yeah.
John Baker.
Yes, exactly.
Baker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And thank you for that question, Josh.
Yeah, hook.
Or no, I was saying cook.
Oh, cook. Yeah, cook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be a nice little program topic as well.
Yeah.
The history behind common surnames. We have a big old list of anytime something comes up, we put it in our list.
Yeah, Miller.
Miller, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one. That's a good
That's
one.
a good one.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have today, folks. So we do hope that you will join us next week. And if, of course, before then, for our live stream tomorrow, we've got our member streams on Fridays. We've also got our podcast. If you have not checked out our podcast at thenagainpodcast.com, I'll put a link in the chat for y'all there. And we always appreciate y'all hanging out with us. Y'all make these programs possible through your support, your donations, your views. So thank you so much. All right, guys. Until next week, please stay safe and take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, you guys.